Hello, as Martin says, my name's Iain Chalmers. I work in a program of work called the James Lind Initiative, and we were one of the partners in a bid to try and get social media and exploit it together with Eric here and Tristram and Amanda to help people become better bullshit detectors, basically, about health claims. And it failed. We spent about 2 years building it up. We had a great deal of help from David Karlin, who used to be one of the people at the Wellcome Trust who had to assess these proposals, but it didn't work. But this series has done, and so in some senses this presentation comes out of that experience. Now, I believe there are some quite important skeletons in academic medicine's cupboards. And in some senses, can people see past me actually? Maybe I'm in your way. Is that better? Yeah, okay. A couple of years ago, a colleague, Paul Glaziou, who used to be the director of the Centre for Evidence-Based Medicine in Oxford, and I wrote a paper published in the Lancet about avoidable waste in the production and reporting of research evidence. And we reckoned that 85% of a very large total pot of money was being wasted. And what was quite interesting is that no one came into the correspondence columns to deny that this could possibly be the case. More than that, it got a very positive response from the National Institute for Health Research, which started to look at its own ways of both commissioning research and monitoring research, and made some changes in the light of this information. And I'm just going to talk about one aspect of this, which is that over 50% of studies never get published in full. And I suppose I should be more specific and say that I'm really talking about clinical trials. And this is one of the things that Ben Goldacre, in his latest book, he's going to be speaking in this series, draws attention to. And as you see from the title, he locates the problem with Pharma. I've endorsed the book on the back cover. I actually think it's the fault of my profession, the medical profession. These fairly scandalous practices could not be done if it was not the case that members of my profession were colluding in publication bias, all sorts of other problems. And I'm glad to say this book is beginning to stir things up. There was a letter in the Times yesterday signed by quite a lot of people. The Minister in the Lords is finding it difficult to avoid answering some of these challenges, and I'm told that some of us will probably be meeting with him next month. This we put at the beginning of that paper in the Lancet because it illustrates how human a problem this is. Alessandra Liberati was an Italian health services researcher who died on the 1st of January this year. And he had multiple myeloma. And this is what he said in an article he wrote in the BMJ. Research results should be easily accessible to people who need to make decisions about their own health. Why was I forced to make my decision, knowing that information was somewhere but not available? Was the delay because the results were less exciting than expected, or because of the evolving field of myeloma research, there are now new exciting hypotheses or drugs to look at? How far can we tolerate the butterfly behavior of researchers moving on to the next flower well before the previous one has been fully exploited? Well, he died still waiting for the results of the controlled trials, which had been presented in meetings years before and never been published in full. Here's the measure of the problem. This is data published in 2009, and basically shows that the problem is across the board. It's not just a problem of pharma. Pharma may be very slightly worse in not publishing stuff than academia, but academia is greatly to blame too. And you can see whichever way you slice this problem, you find that about 50% of trials don't get published. And not only do they not get published, the ones that do are not a representative sample of those that have been done. Negative trials, trials that have disappointing results, disappointing perhaps to a commercial organization, disappointing to someone who has had a cherished hypothesis which hasn't been supported, they get buried. They don't get reported. So the consequence is that those of us, all of us I guess, who are potential patients or patients, together with the people that try to look after us as best they can in the health service, are dished up a selected and biased sample of the evidence that's come from research. And that's unfair, particularly because several of us take part in these trials, and we expect that we had been participating. This is the evidence of the bias. The vertical line down the center shows that were there no differences in the chances of a negative trial and a positive trial being published, the estimates, which you see as those little squares with their uncertainty around them represented as the horizontal line, they would cluster around that vertical line. They don't. And the problem is not that journal manuscripts get discriminated against because of their results. There's a bit of evidence that that happens. The main problem, though, is people not actually submitting their reports of research for publication. And as you see, there's something between a twofold and fivefold increased chances of a statistically significant result being published. And because of that, patients have suffered and died unnecessarily, which is by far the most important consequence. But in addition, resources for healthcare and health research have been wasted. Some of you may remember this event. It happened at a hospital it actually happened at a research enterprise, Parexel in Northwick Park, and 6 young men, volunteers, to receive a new monoclonal antibody, TGN-1412, were given this stuff all at the same time, which was a pretty basic mistake anyway, and they became acutely ill. The NHS saved them in the intensive care unit of Northwick Hospital. Some of them lost toes and fingers. All of them have probably had their immunocompetence compromised for the rest of their lives. Now, what's sad is that there had been a single patient only studied in Southampton some years before with a comparable antibody who had had a similar reaction. But Professor Terry Hamblin, who did the study, felt there was no point in submitting that experience for publication because the drug wasn't going anywhere. No one was going to accept it as a commercially interesting possibility. And so he thought no one would be interested in publishing it. If only he had, it's very good that he came out with this story after this event, then people might have avoided, these 6 men might have avoided what had happened to them. There are other examples. In 1993, these commendable researchers from Nottingham reported a trial which had actually been done in 1980, and this was of a drug which suppresses heart rhythm abnormalities in people who are having heart attacks. And there were 9 deaths in the drug group when the trial was done and 1 in the placebo group. And they thought that it might be due to chance. And anyway, the drug was abandoned for commercial reasons and it wasn't published. But the results, which they then eventually described in 1993, might have provided an early warning of trouble ahead. What was the trouble ahead? This class of drugs was killing more Americans every year than were killed in the whole of the Vietnam War. A remarkable holocaust, one might say. And so this problem of unpublished trials is very large. Even big trials don't get published. And it raises important questions about the contract that we have with people who participate in research, the implied contract, if not the written contract. And what are institutional review boards, that's research ethics committees in our language, and the sponsors, what are their responsibilities? And what about products that are developed but then abandoned after research and not being published? In other words, not taking account of the possibility that other people will go up the same blind alley, not knowing that their predecessors have been up it and found that there wasn't anything worth pursuing there. It's a sort of built-in inefficiency to the drug discovery process. So it's not just commercially sponsored research. These data were published in the Lancet quite recently. 50% of the projects funded by the EU have so far not, between those years, have so far not been manifested in any published report. Massive amount of our money. Does this help to explain the disappointing discovery rate of important new drugs? If you look at the second column from the left there, these are phase 2 trials. They're done in patients, and they take information from phase 1 trials in terms of the design. And what you see there is that the success rate is not very impressive at the earliest time period, that's 1995, but in fact it's actually falling over time. And when these data were presented, when I first saw them, by two people respectively from different drug companies that produced the same data, I asked them whether they felt that non-publication of phase 1 trials might be part of the reason that the high failure rate in phase 2 trials. And they said actually they thought that might be a problem. In the afternoon of the same meeting, someone from a contract research organization, Quintiles, said what really frustrated him and them as a company was that they would be asked to design and run a trial for a company. They knew it was going up a blind alley because they'd been up the blind alley with another company previously, but they weren't allowed to say that. Commercial in confidence. So built-in inefficiency to drug discovery. It happens also in animal studies, publication bias. This really great group of people are starting to expose problems which we know existed in clinical trials and have known for about 30 or 40 years. They're showing that exactly the same problems exist when it comes to animal studies as well. Who's worried about this? It's unethical, it's unscientific, it's harmful, and it's uneconomic. Well, I've been whittering on about it for over 20 years, and it hasn't made a blind bit of difference. If anything, things have got worse. 1996, I was a co-author of a paper with Julian Savulescu. Does anyone here know Julian? He's in the Department of Philosophy. He's a medical ethicist. Where we asked the question, are research ethics committees behaving unethically? And one of the ways in which we challenged them was that they were acquiescing in biased underreporting of research which they had approved. There's some recent signs of the leadership that's needed in my profession, particularly, because my profession is mostly to blame. What about industry? Well, this is an article in a popular publication, says beware the drug companies, but I think actually you have to be discriminating. You have to beware some drug companies. For example, looking at these anti-flu drugs, so-called neuraminidase inhibitors, researchers found that GSK was in fact extremely forthcoming, but Roche was not. GSK said some years ago, this is 2009, that they have a policy now because they had a very bad CEO during the early 90s, a man called Jean-Pierre Garnier. And much of the scandals that have been landing on their desk, and you've been hearing about through the news, happened on his watch. But since the new team came in, Andrew Whitty is the CEO now, a number of things have happened where they're showing that they've had a very bad reputation as a consequence of these things, and something's got to be done. So that was a statement that they made in The Lancet. This is a more recent one, a few days ago, which is showing things moving in the right direction. But what about Roche? Well, Roche has been less forthcoming. Only 40% of Tamiflu trials have been published, yet 3 billion has been spent on purchasing Tamiflu in that year. We spent about 1 billion in stockpiling the stuff. Now, on the basis of the information that's available, it's probable that it's no more effective than paracetamol, and yet we are the victims of this scam, we the public. And who's on the board of directors of Roche? John Bell, Regius Professor of Medicine in Oxford. He has a medical degree, therefore his responsibilities are primarily to patients. Has he made a fuss about this behavior of the company that he's on the board of? Not as far as I know. He was president of the Academy of Medical Sciences, which, as you see, has a stylish central London conference venue to offer those of you who wish to hire it. When he was, I wrote to him and said, why isn't the Academy discussing this lack of scientific ethical leadership to confront biased underreporting of research? That was in 2006, in October. He hadn't replied the following spring. I said, when are you going to reply to my letter? He said, could you send me another copy of it? I think I might have mislaid it. So I sent him another copy. A few months later, he still hasn't replied. What about medical professional organizations? Well, the only medical professional organization that's taken a stand on this is the Faculty of Pharmaceutical Medicine, which has been saying since the mid-90s it's unethical to withhold the publication of any results of research on any pharmaceutical product, whether the results are positive, negative, or inconclusive. Why is medical academia content to acquiesce in biased underreporting of research? I think that Edwin Gale comes close to it. He said academic and non-academic medicine are pervaded by conflicts of interest, and too many people benefit from the situation for this to be openly acknowledged. What's needed is a change of culture in which serving two masters becomes as socially unacceptable as smoking a cigarette. In conclusion, I don't believe that academic medicine is ready for an open dialogue with the public because there are too many skeletons in its cupboards. What should be done? Help the public to become aware of how the resources they provide for research are being wasted, and promote more critical public involvement in medical research, from agenda setting to dissemination of results. This little girl is reaching up for Ben Godecker's first book, Bad Science, on which the front cover reads, "Bad Science introduces the basic scientific principles to help everyone become a more effective bullshit detector." Words written by her grandfather, me. This book, Testing Treatments, is now the basis for the second edition was published last year, is the basis for a website which Amanda and myself and Paul Glasgow and Douglas Badnock and others are developing to try and get people to become better bullshit detectors. So that's me done. It's now up to, he's got a lovely French accent, so you'll have someone more easy to listen to than me as he takes over. Oh yeah.
I'm not sure about the French accent, so...
Oh, it's beautiful.
I'll try my best cut glass accent. Thank you. All right. No, not my conclusions. Un peu tout long. Et voilà. All right, well, first of all, I want to thank... Can you hear me? First of all, I want to thank Iain for inviting me to do this talk with him. Maybe I should introduce briefly what I've done before. After my PhD in virology, I have left research and set up a charity in public engagement, and have worked with the public for 6 years, doing what I will present. Then I've worked at the Wellcome Trust headquarters, doing public engagement again. And then I've had a special career re-entry grant to come back to research as a virologist. So you should know that it is possible to leave research and come back to it. I don't necessarily recommend it as a career option. It's a bit difficult, but it's possible. All right, so this is a workshop I organized in my hometown of Marseille. Sure, you can all read French, but just in case, must one all believe scientists. It was in the city center, and I think that was one year where there was no shootout, so it must be 2005, 2006, something like that. So, yeah, I was very interested in controversies, and before explaining this workshop, which we did with the public, I'll explain you why I'm interested in controversies, and maybe using the example of animal research, maybe we'll explore whether controversies really come from the public, the fact that they don't understand researchers, that they don't trust us, that they don't like us, whatever, or that the media, blah, blah, or whether controversies might also come from research. I think that's also what Iain has been showing. So one paper actually studied this. It's called the chilling effect. So I think the answer is kind of in the question. How do researchers react to controversy? And I'll come back to it. But what I'm going to present is a poll in Nature in 2006 about what researchers thought about animal research. It was done on about 2,000 people. Half of them worked on animal, half of them didn't work on animal. But just by curiosity, who works on animal here? On animals here? No one?
Or who has?
Oh, who has? Okay. Wow, that's almost no one. Okay. So, one of the first conclusion, they asked whether people think that whether these researchers thought that animal research was important or essential for medical research. About 1% thinks it's not at all necessary, but you have to remember it's an underestimate because half of the people in the poll work on animal research, which is a great overrepresentation as we're just seeing now. And in total, there are about 25% of researchers who don't think it's essential. They might think it's important, but they don't think it's essential. And that's maybe not what you would have said if you had been asked the question. Now, the article has these words of Karlin Blakemore. I don't know a single scientist who would not prefer to use alternatives to animal research. Well, I respect very much Karlin Blakemore and his courage. Yeah, I've forgotten to say why I mentioned animal research. Because for a foreigner, it's very puzzling controversy in the UK. When I was at Wellcome Trust and I crossed the country visiting researchers and the public, and all researchers telling me, oh, it's very difficult, animal research. We can't speak about it. We don't. I thought almost a siege mentality, and it's very strange. It's not like that in other countries, certainly not in France. Anyway, Karlin Blakemore. So, the poll asked the question, in the long term, would you see the elimination of animal experiments as desirable and achievable, desirable, undesirable? So, undesirable, who thinks? So people say, if we could eliminate animal experiments, that even if we could, that would be bad. We shouldn't eliminate animal experiments. So who thinks it's between 0 and 5%? most researchers want to eliminate animal research, like Colin Blackmore said. You think it's between 0 and 5%. Who thinks it's between 5 and 10%? Okay, 10 and 15%? Okay, between 15 and 20% of researchers want to keep animal research even if it's not necessary. Okay, between 20 and 25? More than 25? Well, some people are very shy. Well, actually, 22% of respondents thought that even if it were possible to, if it were achievable, they still wouldn't eliminate animal research. So Colin Blakemore was wrong. Do you hear about these things? No, you would never suspect this from the discours des chercheurs? From the le discours from the public from the discourse of the public discourse of researchers, you would never suspect this.
Presumably that was taken from animal researchers, did it?
I'm sorry?
In that survey, could you break it down by the animal researchers versus non-animal?
No, and that's quite incredible. I have the detailed survey results of the survey, but they don't break it down by animal research and not, which is rather incredible, not to say stupid.
I'd have guessed they're all animal researchers. And then
Well, I don't know. Yeah, maybe, I don't know. But that would be 50% of animal research who would see. And then Colin Blakemore would have I'm not sure, such a bad judgment. I'm not sure. I wish they had, I wish there were more polls about it. Sorry, was there another question? No? Okay. Well, you're free to actually interrupt me. It's more lively if I'm being interrupted. Thank you for Amanda. Okay. So, then there's the question, do you believe the animal movements make it difficult to say these kind of things? To say, well, we're not so sure, animal research is always useful, blah, blah. Well, a great majority of researchers say, yes, the animal movements makes it difficult. But if you think about it, that makes no sense. If I went down my zoology building and talked to the brave people who brave rain and hail in May to talk about, to say, well, stop animal research. If I went down and I told them this, I told them the limits of animal research, they'd be very happy. They wouldn't castigate me or anything. So it can't be the animal rights movement. They would love to know these kind of things. In fact, it's got to be peer pressure. And in the Nature article, that's what a neuroscientist says. Sorry, is it too low? Well, he says the scientific community, rather than animal rights movement, makes it difficult to voice a nuanced opinion. No?
Well, perhaps we'll come back to it in the discussion, but I think Colin Blakemore's own experience and the experience of some of the companies who are rearing animals suggests that actually, if you put your head above the parapet, there was quite a big risk.
Well, there might have been a physical risk, but he didn't.
Blaze bombs, I mean, those were real.
But he didn't voice a nuanced. On the contrary, he said animal research is good, should be carried out, is necessary, etc. But as a researcher, would you be comfortable raising your head above the parapet and saying there are quite some limits to animal research, etc.? Then I don't do this, and I think I don't do this. I think I'm going to be attacked by other researchers in the UK at least. So this is what the chilling effects report studied, and he says there is a chilling effect. It can come from other researchers, it can come from funders, it can come from the government, from many sources. Certainly, when I worked at the Wellcome Trust, there was a kind of party line. There was a very definite idea that you wouldn't say that animal research had some limits, had some problems, etc. That certainly, I was afraid of sticking my head above the parapet. So, much of animal research is bad or is misleading. I don't know if it's 10%, 20%, or 50%, but there's an overwhelming evidence about it. And you can see it's the BMG, it's Nature, there are many articles. You showed one recent one. How many people, just by curiosity, how many people do know this? How many people know that there have been many studies criticizing animal research in the past 5 years? Okay, how many people were not aware of this? Don't you find it strange that you're not aware of it? Well, I'm going to tell you right away why you're not aware of it. Or not to tell you, but maybe we can think about it together. Okay, I'm taking 2 polls. One in Nature, I think 2005 or 2006, the same years, about same number of researchers, few thousands. And then the poll we've just seen about animal research. So, this one has garnered 400 citations, a poll that says there is fraud in research. 400 citations. This one, which half of you or most of you have not heard about, has garnered 14 citations, although 2,000 researchers have taken part in it. So why do you think that is? Why do you think the same year, same number of researchers, same journal, same very important subject? I mean, this one could actually probably kill more people than a single fraud by scientists. So I'm asking you, this is a break in the... I've never made this talk before, so I don't know. What do you think? Why do you think there's such a difference in citations? Maybe it is because there are more people who fraud and who are concerned than people who work with animal research?
Well,
no. Yeah?
Scientists behaving badly is gossipy and interesting. And there's also a bit of shouting, so that's always interesting.
Okay.
But another one might be that scientists behaving badly, most of the things that we try to fix it, scientists would be happy with, being careful, but you might be worried there'd be an overreaction to the animal experiment or design such that it makes it really very bureaucratic or difficult to do animal research. The reaction to it might, so you don't want everybody paying attention to it, because the world might react in such a way that it's harder to do animal experiments.
So you mean there would be a self-censorship, not raising the profile of bad experiments in order to save the good experiments that we are doing? Okay, that's possible.
I think the first one is almost more anti-science than the second one, which is pro-science, but people are doing it badly.
Yeah.
There's a whole cult of anti-science.
So yeah, but it's cited mostly by researchers who say they want to improve they want to improve research. And surely there are as many people, if they want to improve research, they could also improve animal research or voice more nuanced opinions.
Maybe it's scientists trying to foster integrity by coming out about, the incredibly powerful application, meaning and necessity in animal science. So this is people trying to publicize what underlies bad behavior of science.
Sorry, I'm not sure I've understood. They want to underline. No, they don't. Okay, so.
I think it's an attempt by scientific establishment when they cite that.
Yes.
To promote integrity.
Okay, it's.
Disclosing, discussing and acknowledging that there is a problem.
Okay, so I think all the explanations are correct. So people want to restore the integrity of science. They think we will lose trust if we don't clean up our own ranks. But then why not cite the other report? Why not cite that many researchers don't think that animal research is necessary or important?
Well, what about the journals they were in? One in Nature and one in an obscure...
No, Nature. No, that's what I say. It's the same.
In the same
Yeah, it's the same journal. It's the same year, the same number of researchers. So it's actually the poll that is cited. Scientists share thought on animal research, and the fact is that 25% of researchers think it's not necessary, and they are very, shocking results. Shocking. It's not a judgment. It's surprising compared to what Colin Blakemore says. It's very surprising that, many researchers appear to not want the elimination of animal research, even if it were possible. So that's rather shocking. So yeah.
This is about 22%. Some people probably genuinely think that it's wrong to experiment on humans because they're superior. It'd be better to experiment on another animal.
It is possible, but they ask you if it were achievable. It's desirable but unachievable, but it's undesirable. Even if it were achievable, it would be undesirable. So maybe they could say, well, we need to know about animals for their own health. And actually, the Wellcome Trust, in its title, it works for the health of animals, not only for the health of humans. So yeah, in that case, that would be possible. But what everybody said was right, but my personal interpretation is that it's a dirty secret, and we don't want to be seen washing a dirty linen? A dirty linen in public. That's really my strong impression. There's self-censorship. You know, I myself, I'm very happy that Iain allowed me to say this in public, because I was afraid of sticking my head above the parapet. By the way, I have a confession to make, which I didn't do a disclosure. I like animals. I like animals in my plate with pepper and salt. No, I really do. But, so, you know, I'm not a vegetarian at all. Well, I think this all revolves around this article in Science, again, forbidden knowledge. You can see there's a lot out in Nature and Science that is discussed, but is completely swept under the carpet. Forbidden knowledge, which I encourage you to read. It is this kind of knowledge that we know, we have, as researchers, we're very, very good at detecting what we should say and not say to be funded. And yeah, we avoid it. It's only natural. I'm sorry?
And I just said some better than others. We didn't say the right things.
Yeah. So what I would like to say before coming to the public workshop is that controversies are learning occasions. Instead of saying the public doesn't understand the value of animal research, the public doesn't understand genetically modified, the public doesn't trust, we should listen. We should take this as an occasion to improve our evidence base, because every criticism is going to be valid and to make us see something in a different light. So now I'll just present you results of case studies on scientific controversies. I try to see what the public would think of controversies internal to research. So this is very much inspired from the National Center for Case Study in Buffalo, which I really recommend that you go and see. They have hundreds of case studies for teaching science. It's rather incredible that in medicine and in law, everybody does case studies, the story of a Doe against Warren, etc. But I've never had some in my education. So the controversies revolves around the existence of nanobacteria. This is a popular article in a popular science magazine. And the question was whether nanobacteria are another form of life and whether they exist in the first place. It came from two articles at 1 or 2 years interval, again in the same journal, PNAS. The first researchers, they filtered bovine serum with filters that were too small to let bacteria through, and they let them on the shelf for 2 months, and they saw that there were minute organisms that grew, and when they put gamma rays, they didn't grow anymore. They isolated DNA from them, etc. And then another group of researchers very politely say, well, nanobacteria don't exist. And other controversies we treated is there. Before I'm going to this controversy, we asked whether there was a mountain gene. So all the people that climbed Mount Everest without oxygen, they had a certain version of the angiotensin converter enzyme, which I think is like spread half-half in the population. But the 14 people who did it in the trial, they all had one version. So it scandalized my colleague who really gave me abuse. She thought, because why couldn't there be a mountain gene? It seems logical that if you want to climb Everest without oxygen, you need to have a special enzyme. But she actually thought, she was a very good alpinist, mountaineer, and she actually thought, well, maybe if I have the wrong gene, I can't do it. And she was furious at this idea. So you can see that even in researchers there's controversy. Molecule of love, oxytocin, molecule of attachment, etc. So we did quite a few controversial subjects. So here is how we did it. Again, it's inspired from the from the Buffalo Center for Case Study. So we had extracted the photos from the original article, translated it in French, of course. We had this on A3 paper, and we described experiment by experiment. They use a scanning microscope without coloration, with coloration. They filter it. You can see the bacteria that grow. Just the images from the article. Of course, we have to explain what DNA is, etc. Then we show the second article, where they do different experiments with different kind of microscopes. They use different techniques to analyze the DNA, etc. And we have an interpretation sheet where we ask them what do they think about each experiment, what do they think they say, and what is their conclusion in the end. And their conclusion was very surprising to me, because basically they picked up on the fact that when we talk about reproducibility, you would think that the second article is going to make the same experiments as the first one and say, well, actually it's not true. But that's not the case. None of the experiments of the second article were actually a direct rebuttal of the first article, because they didn't use the same kind of microscope, they didn't use the same test for DNA, they used a less sensitive but more robust test, which makes sense. But because they don't actually rebuttal, they don't actually rebut the first article. They use every single technique they use is completely different. So as a result, in the eyes of the public, what they picked on is that, well, there's no way to tell because they don't do the same experiment. So, yeah, I forgot to say. What they say, they said, it's a common contaminant, the DNA. It's not because you put X-ray and it doesn't grow that it's alive. You could have killed the microcrystals and they're not being alive. And at the end, there was a third article which rebuts both of them, does a third set of unrelated experiments, and says both of the first articles are wrong. That was the conclusion of the once we had discussed. I just presented this third article, but I had no idea that would be the public conclusion. It was not ironic or anything, but the conclusion of the public was that, well, you can't really tell, and that was actually, I think, a rather correct conclusion. So they were very interested, but they were a bit surprised. It made me feel like the emperor was naked, or le roi est nu, as we say. So, don't know if I made a good job of presenting it, but certainly the public was ready to hear it and very, very interested in a controversy that appears rather obscure. So today, I don't know where they still talk about nanobacteria, but not in mainstream circles, and it's been patented, so can't really tell you. So our conclusions, I think, with Iain, we agreed on the conclusion. Well, academic medicine is not ready for an open dialogue with the public. It's not the public; it's us. The public can hear the truth, and it's beneficial. And controversies are an opportunity to improve research. Next time you think that the public doesn't trust us, I have a body of evidence like this that we are one of the most trusted professions. The public exerts its critical thinking, and often they're right and there are some faults in the evidence base. And I thought, if Iain agrees, I would say researchers' understanding of the public, and not only public understanding of research. Do you agree with this one, Iain? Yeah, it's not only about public understanding of science, it's a lot to do about researchers' understanding of the public. Well, that was it. We are ready to take questions. Thank you. I'm not sure I was very clear.
There's been something of a tradition that I act as chairman for the questions. Not that I expect anyone's going to rip anyone to shreds here, but just in case they might be minded to. Does anyone want to ask any questions? Or make any comments? Yes.
So it was a science center, the equivalent of, the Oxford Science Center. So the science center did the communication. It was people interested in science, but in research. In fact, most of them, they were people who thought there was an engineer, architect. They thought they were interested in the intellectual approach to research, and they thought, well, it's just like philosophy. It's something that can help me make things of science. So, of course, for this kind of workshop, it's going to be people who are really interested in research, not just the flashy side and the novelty, but also the activists in general, for instance, are very informed about research, of course.
I was wondering regarding the underreporting of results. It's a fair amount of effort sometimes to take an experiment that didn't have very interesting and write about it. Does just making all the raw data available go far enough or part of the way to solving the problem? Instead of publishing papers about negative results, at least publish the data, make it available.
This is certainly a suggestion that's been made. In fact, people have suggested that journals shouldn't actually publish them. They should be, the two people I had in mind, the co-authors of the article I think of, were the former editor of BMJ, Richard Smith, and Iain Roberts, who was a public health interventions experimenter. And they suggested that basically there should be data repositories, and you should have, for any particular group of trials addressing similar questions, you should deposit the data there of a new study when it came through. You should not comment on the results because you need to take account of all of the information. And that's, in fact, the model that the small particle physicists have had for 30 years now. The archive that was started at Stanford, with the person whose name I associate with is Ginsburg. And the small particle physicists have been doing this for decades as a matter of course. So it's sort of, and indeed the social scientists are doing it, particularly the social science archive at the University of Essex is a place where if you've done a particular piece of social science research funded by some funders, they will insist that you deposit your whole data set there. So all of Anne Cartwright's survey data is deposited there. So medicine is coming very late to this thing, partly because there's money tied up in it. So yes, your suggestion should be taken seriously, is being taken seriously by some people, is being actively promoted by others, but in terms of implementation, it's slow.
I've got to say at the beginning, if you'd like to just introduce yourself and you ask a question, just tell us a little bit who you are and what perspective you come from, that'd be great, thank you.
Hi, I'm Adam and I'm a public health registrar. So it's just a question about the money wastage. I mean, it's absolutely right and unethical that money should be wasted on research that's either been done beautifully, rejected, negative, and not published, or research that's been poorly designed. But do you think to play devil's advocate slightly, in this context now with the EU's threatening to cut a large proportion of this research budget, that we're creating our own problems here by suggesting that we're wasting a lot of our money and it's going to allow further budget cuts in the scientific and research community?
Well, from the perspective of a person who gets his income from research, it's an obvious worry that you would have that speaking the truth to the public might actually result in the public being less inclined to endorse or actually provide money for research. The other way of looking at it is, what's our moral responsibility, given that we should be accountable for our use of public funds? Well, people who don't write up their research at all and get it made available either in some archive or in journals, there's actually nothing to show except perhaps what's inside their head for our investment, our public investment in their work. And I think that David's message is that basically scientists aren't prepared to be open about these skeletons. It's something which actually as high a proportion as possible of those of us within those professions should shout about and try and get the public on our side in getting things changed.
But if we really take the 80% seriously, well, there could be a 25% drop of research, but if we actually fund the proper studies and make reviews before, then we don't need all that money.
It seems to be like a very argument why these things aren't household.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Or people don't want these things too. But there's been many studies on trust, and the overwhelming factor, if you have a dilemma like this, the overwhelming factor in trust, in being trusted, is transparency. And even if you do collaboration, I do a lot of collaboration, I'm sure many of you do. If you ask everybody about what they want to do, they will let you do what you had decided in the first place. I mean, not decided, but your option. If you're not transparent, people don't trust you. It's just that simple, you know. So, and there have been many social science studies about that. There's another question. Yeah, of course.
I think there are two things in there, and they ought to be separated. And it's probably put best. Did any of you hear on the Today programme this morning in the section between 8 o'clock and 9 o'clock, there were two women asked their opinions about mammographic screening. And I thought they had been brilliantly selected, and they were brilliant, both of them, in putting forward two completely different points of views using exactly the same data. So I think that the job of science is to try and get the best data you can to inform a decision. And I think that the randomized trial of badger culling, which David Cox, who is one of the most famous living statisticians, was the principal advisor. I think that was a very important study to show how much we know of the things that we didn't know. But at the end of the day, I like that too, actually. If it had come out with the wrong result, I would have said, damn it, for all the tiny difference that you're talking about, I'm not interested. Farmers should get better at animal husbandry. That was the criticism that came out, wasn't it?
This is a new bias, the love of unattractive animals. Because I mean, unattractive animals, people wouldn't have cared. Yes. David, you have a...
Well, yes, but the public has actually, the activists have actually been hugely useful in reducing, improving, etc. animal research. As you said, there is a meeting route. There are some extremists, but yeah, again, the public has improved animal research, has improved reduction. There's less money. You know, if you had a cloning technique that's not very efficient to make stem cell embryo, ES cells for transgenic animals, you know, well, people say, well, don't waste so many embryos. Well, they're going to be more efficient, and so the public pushes for it. It's a force for good. So, yes.
I was listening earlier to radio before this morning to the same programme, and I don't know whether you heard the period between 7 and 8.
Yeah.
When the two doctors were describing the Danish study.
And someone called Cameron, is that right? Yeah, the chair of the committee.
It's disturbing you, he's called David Cameron.
Yes.
Oh.
He was much more convincing than the real one, I think. But But even as somebody who's read testing treatments, so I've had my early treatment of understanding, I'm getting better. It was actually quite interesting to hear these two people arguing about their respective studies, and they were bandying randomized controlled trials against each other. And I was thinking, it was very interesting having the controversy there, and in fact it was a more constructive thing than the Today programme normally does. Because normally they'd have somebody who, from the Daily Mail, as the other side. But it was actually quite hard, as a listener, to understand what I should conclude.
It is hard. I mean, it is genuinely hard to know what to conclude from the data that are available.
The Daily Mail did cover this on the front page today. For the Daily Mail, better than average, but not. It said how many women were unnecessarily treated for every woman that was necessarily treated. I haven't seen the actual research, so.
Even John Humphrey's got it right. He's actually.
Now that is
Because Evan Davis is the best in terms of scientific understanding. But John Humphrey's actually got it right. He said, okay, you've got these women who are having unnecessary mutilating surgery, but faced with a particular woman, you don't know whether she's going to be one of those women or not. And that's the dilemma. And it really is a very difficult, and that I thought was illustrated brilliantly by these two women who contributed about 8:15. Those two clips would be very good teaching material, I think. They're really good.
But if you think about it, that's why one of the reasons why the public is so interesting when you submit a controversy to them. Because often you can't conclude from the data these controversies. They didn't conclude. They conclude that it was not possible to conclude. But as researchers, we think so much. Well, it's eradication. We think we actually know, or there's some ego. We don't see it, or we don't like to see it. But there's some ego in a choice. We want to be right. We want to be the first. There are some pressures. Blah blah. Public looks at the data, has no preconception, and that's why they can actually. No, it's true. That's why they can actually. If this kind of data were presented to a panel, they might actually make a better job than experts at coming with a conclusion.
Okay, we'll go here first, then over to Amanda.
Hi, I'm Susie from Karlin Experiences Research Group as well. I've just been mulling over your 400 citations for scientists behaving badly. And I wonder whether there's this sort of observable tendency to distance oneself. So if you think that you might be in a community that other people might think are discreditable community, then the chances are you'll do quite a lot of hard work yourself to explain why you're aware that there's this possible discreditable interpretation, but you're not like that. And almost by mentioning, if you're a scientist, that other scientists behave badly, you're saying, I'm aware of that, I'm not one of those bad scientists, I'm therefore a good scientist.
Talking about me.
So I'm talking about Iain. I'm a sociologist, and this is regarded as moral identity work. The distancing from the other group is an important part of moral identity. So I wonder whether the reason why that's being cited so often is because a lot of scientists want to say, yes, there is this possibility, but I'm drawing a line in between who I am and who they are. And maybe 14 citations for a research report is more normal, and the peculiar thing is so many scientists are so concerned to do this distancing work, which I think tells us something very interesting about how scientists perceive themselves perhaps being.
That's a bit depressing. That's a bit depressing if that's true.
Do we know those 400 citations? All of them might be saying this paper was rubbish.
No. I know. No, most of them claim it, and it's lots of scientific researchers and lots of sociologists too. But many scientific researchers in many fields who've done similar studies or agreeing with it. Yeah.
What you just said answers part of it. Is it spans many fields versus animal research, which is a fairly niche thing. And so an article that appeals to many fields can be cited multidisciplinarity, so it's got a much higher chance of having a high number.
Are you right? Yeah, well.
So that's part of it. It might not be everything, but that's certainly got something to do with it.
That might be true, actually. Never thought about it, but that might be true.
Amanda.
Yeah, so both of you have tellingly made the case that academia has got to put its house in order, and Sue said, you know, what to draw a line between us, that we're all in order, and those that aren't. We want to engage the public now, and we are engaging the public now as a kind of pressure to make us put our own house in order. It's almost like you've got fed up of writing since 1990 to the professional groups, and now we're a counter movement. Let's get the public to demand this. Is that right?
Well, certainly I've given up on the professions. I mean, they've had plenty of opportunity to amend their ways, but they, particularly on the issue of publication bias, it's got worse and worse.
So to get back to the theme of this, using social media to leverage, you know, enhance public understanding, we're actually using the public understanding to leverage improvement in scientific method. Is that what we're doing?
Well, I certainly see the potential for it, just from the example that David gave, which is very nice. I mean, you know, people who are basically tabula rasa, and they're presented with these non-replications of things that pretend to be replications, and recognize that. That's brilliant.
Yes, I'd like to take the example maybe of climate science. There's been an enormous pressure from research and researchers, climate scientists who say, no, it's right, we know it's right, but it's not right. Part of I wish they would grade the evidence. They would say, we are sure that Earth is warming. We are 80% sure of this data, whether it's done by man, and this data, and here's what we need by data. And if they did this, if they responded correctly to the public saying, you are right to question us, and we're going to strengthen our evidence base, and this is where, if people graded things in science, they graded the quality of evidence, like they do in clinical research. My God, but instead of this is a polarization. In France, some really, really good scientists, who geologists or something, they've been attacked and bullied by climate scientists, although the discipline doesn't even exist. They say, oh, you're a geologist, you're not a climate scientist. It doesn't even exist, a climate scientist. You can't cover possibly the range of stuff needed. So the public, we could actually use their querying to improve our evidence base instead of, you know, having a knee-jerk reaction.
There's another problem that was pointed out to me, which is that many of the science journalists, perhaps a majority, were previously scientists themselves. And so they feel perhaps reluctant to criticize the community from which they were previously members. So
some of them are critical towards science.
Some of them,
yeah.
But I mean, one example is one of the headlines you put up was the one from BMJ's, how helpful is animal research in human disease, I forget what it is. Something like that. But, where's the evidence that animal research benefits humans? And that was written by some pretty distinguished epidemiologists, actually, Shah Ibrahim, Ian Roberts, might have been, and the first author was someone called Nano. Now, when this came out, and it referred to a reasonable question and gave some reasonable reasons for asking the question, because it was not a straightforward answer. This was presented by, remind me of his name?
Oh, the folk team, Tom, this Times Science editor. What's his name?
Science editor.
Maybe I can find it.
As having been written by anti-vivisection.
Was that
Yes, Mark Henderson.
Mark Henderson.
He's head of communication at the Wellcome Institute. But he automatically assumed that anyone who was associated with an article of that title must be an anti-vivisectionist. And he actually published that assumption in the article that he wrote about it.
Oh.
So that, I would say, is an example of a knee-jerk reaction from someone within science who's trying to actually make sure that the bit of science that they have been involved in isn't going to be attacked without a rebuttal. But it was such a stupid rebuttal, given the people that he was characterizing, that for me, I mean, I gather that they were quite for the peak something.
Manifesto?
The peak manifesto. But, you know, I wouldn't trust him because of his
But yeah, so to come back to actually my former point, where is the evidence that animal research benefits humans? There is plenty of evidence that some animal research on some diseases has benefited and benefits humans. But there's plenty of evidence that, let's say on cancer, how many mice I've seen cured of cancer? I remember the first time I saw in Science, it's great. How many times has it cured a human? Almost never, if not never. So it depends on the disease model, and it depends how artificial are the mice. And so if we graded the evidence, we would say, yes, for toxicology it's generally but not always useful. There's a study that you've given me, like half of the time when it kills a rat, it doesn't kill the human, and vice versa. It's much less concordant than you would think. Then for where it's most useful and is for basic research. And for disease research, it depends. If we graded this, if we use the controversy of the public to improve our ways, that our evidence base, that would be great.
So we seem to have developed an ancient global tradition of these talks that when we've had about 15-20 minutes of questions, we sort of segue gently into a drink session.
Oh, wonderful.
As they say. Is that right, Matt? Drinks are outside. But in the